On today's show, John Calipari talking like he's staying at Kentucky. But is that what the big money people in Lexington want? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. On today's show, we're going to talk about the latest with John Calipari as he had his radio show last night, and he actually showed. What did he have to say? I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, we got to dive right into it. As John Calipari, look, there were reports we were expected to hear some sort of decision out of Lexington on the future of John Calipari, possibly as early as Monday or even Tuesday. And Cal made his regular appearance on his coach's radio show Monday evening. Now, right before the show, Matt Norlander of CBS Sports tweeted out. He said, here's the latest on Kentucky per source. Calipari, who is set to appear on his local radio show in minutes, and athletic director Mitch Barnhart have not yet met, but they will meet tomorrow, meaning today. He says the intent of the meeting will be to focus on significant program improvements, not necessarily separation. So as Kyle Tucker of The Athletic went on to write, he said, this is the most likely outcome right now, getting the two sides in a room for a here's what I need from Cal and here's what you must do for Mitch, and an agreement to give it one more go. Tucker said the fact Calipari is still a monster recruiter and motivator gives him a chance to pull out of this ditch, but only with some dead weight cut away from his staff and a commitment to more young/old balance on the roster. So joining Tom Leach on his show, 6:30 WLAP in Lexington, Calipari joined him on the show on Monday evening, and Leach set the tone saying they would be taking fan questions via social media, but not phone calls on the show. Look, that's kind of a given. That would have been a nightmare to take phone calls during that show. But some takeaways from what Calipari had to say. He said, look, we've had better weekends. We are hurting. Our team, our players, our staff, their families, we are all hurting. I'm hurting for them, but I'm hurting. I'm hurting for our fans, but no one is hurting more than me right now. He said, we have a standard here. We're playing to play deep into the NCAA tournament and compete for national titles and win national titles. That's what the standard is for me. Calipari did talk about his upcoming meeting with Mitch Barnhart. He said, we do it every year. He said, we haven't done it yet, but I'll be back in the next couple days. Every year we share our thoughts with each other. I was on the plane back with him, and he's hurting. I look forward to hearing his thoughts on how we can be better. He went on and said, my guess is we will meet tomorrow. He said he still has to have the player meetings to figure out who's doing what. Says he has to evaluate everything in the program. But he did say, I love this state. I love this program. And he said it's not a contest between his love and support for his players and his love of the state and the program. He says he loves every aspect. But Cal went on to say, talked about, look, we're going to try to get these players to come back, and that's got to be the big thing, and did spend a little bit of time on the loss to Oakland and, kind of what went wrong. He said we wanted to take 15 threes a half. We started the game passing up those threes. The other thing is we wanted to score 20 points a half, 40 points in the lane, and let's go after it. He did also bring up the three-point shooter for Oakland, Gulke. He said he went 1 for 9 in a game. So he didn't want to start the game focused solely on him because their other player, Townsend, is so good. Well, Gulke went off from 3. Wasn't such a good strategy to kind of ignore him. But Cal went on to say he knew fans would go crazy after the last loss. He said eventually that craziness will die down. But he said the pain hasn't stopped for him yet either. He said to rehash that game right now makes me physically ill. So Cal did go on to say, look, if someone says to me I'm coming back. The first thing I'm going to say to them is under 8 months until the first game next year, let's go, because I want to get this taste out of my mouth. Kyle Tucker did point out, he said, I don't think Cal has done much yet to lay out any clear plan for improvement, but the total humble tone is a notable shift. He said the plain and simple of it, his point was, this isn't good enough. So anyway, basic takeaway from the Calipari Coaches Show was, sounding like a man who thinks he's going to be the Kentucky head coach next year. And so if Cal's going to be back, then it will very much be on a year where everything he does will be judged. I mean, it will be magnified times 10. And the toughest part for me is, if you're a Kentucky fan and you spend money on season tickets, is how do you get excited about next year, right? Like, a lot of fans have already made up their decision. Like, they've made up their mind. Look, this thing's run its course. You know, one tournament win in the last 5 years, that's not the standard of Kentucky. So, like, if you already made the decision, we got to move on, and we're going to bring him back next year, man, it's a lot of overstaying your welcome in a lot of fans' minds. And you just wonder how many of those will say, you know what, we've had those season tickets at Rupp, let's go ahead and pull back. Or, you know, hey, maybe we're not going to go pack the house for every game this year. Maybe we'll take some games off. You know, I don't know. It'll be fascinating to see what the Kentucky faithful does. But again, Calipari speaking very much like a guy who will be back next year. And we'll talk with Cameron Drummond of the Lexington Herald-Leader here in a minute, get his thoughts on what Cal had to say. We do have one other SEC note to hit on. Vanderbilt has found their next basketball head coach after parting ways with Jerry Stackhouse. Pete Thamel, Jeff Borzella reporting the Commodores are hiring Mark Byington to be the next head coach. Recently led James Madison to pretty historic season, big upset in the NCAA tournament. And they went 32-4, knocking off the 5-seed Wisconsin in the first round. They went 82-36 under his watch as the program transitioned from the CAA to the Sun Belt. And program went 54-15 in his first 2 seasons in the Sun Belt. Byington also spent 7 seasons leading Georgia Southern, where he went 131-97. But in 5 seasons at Vanderbilt, Jerry Stackhouse went 70-92. Looked like they, were going to kind of turn a corner there from 2021 to 2023. But after that, they went 9-23, and it wasn't great. And you thought you were getting some name recognition. Look, everybody knew Jerry Stackhouse and his long NBA career, and seemed like he could be a good coach, but didn't work out. So they're going to go with the James Madison coach, and that'll be Mark Byington. So best of luck to him. And hey, John Calipari, things get tougher there. Vandy, who you thought was an easy win, now he got a new sheriff in town in Nashville, and he's going to try to get Vanderbilt back to national relevance. So be interesting to watch what Byington does there at Vanderbilt. All right, that is you're all caught up on the latest stuff going on there. When we return, we're going to stick with the Kentucky and John Calipari conversation and talk with Cameron Drummond next, all about his takeaways from what Calipari had to say on Monday evening. That is coming your way in just a second. But first, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Look, say goodbye to your busted bracket, because FanDuel is letting you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it is time to get dancing over at America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, we've been talking about it all the time. Hopefully you've done it. If you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? New customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who you think is going to win it all. Just go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's going to get you that special promotion. Get signed up. Take advantage of the great offer they have there, and you get in on all the action this weekend. Whether you think Alabama or Tennessee are going to keep making this run through the big dance, you can bet on them over there at FanDuel.com. Again, make sure you do FanDuel.com/lockedon. Then once you're signed up, you got your account, you can download the app and check it every morning and see what bets you want to make there. It is FanDuel.com/lockedon, and go bet on college hoops until they cut down those nets. This episode also presented by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It is what brings home that winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has got everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. If you're into exhaust kits, superchargers, or even just simple things like LED headlights, wiper blades, roof racks, they got it all up there for you. Whether you're in the speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And they've got the eBay Guaranteed Fit, so your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. That is ebaymotors.com. Going along here, Locked On SEC, and continuing on with one of the biggest topics across the Southeastern Conference, and that is John Calipari. Will he stay? Will he go? Will Kentucky make a coaching change? We'll wait to see what Mitch Barnhart and company over there, Kentucky, decide to do. But last night, John Calipari making his appearance on his coach's show, where a lot of people were maybe a little bit surprised. He still went ahead with it amidst all the, I won't say controversy, but just questions surrounding him and the future of the program. And joining us now, a guy who covers all things Kentucky basketball. He is Cameron Drummond of the Lexington Herald-Leader, and he joins us now. Cameron, welcome in, man. Appreciate you jumping on with us.
Well, of course, as I was telling you, appreciate you having me on. And this is certainly one of the biggest stories in sports right now. And with it happening kind of simultaneously with March Madness, a pretty captive audience to look at what's going down here in Lexington.
Well, look, I'm married to a Kentucky grad, and she has not been happy with all these recent postseasons that end very abruptly. They're used to Kentucky having a very deep run through March. Look, they'd like to win championships, but it's not even all about that. It's about just making a deep run, make some Final Fours, some Elite Eights and all that. And obviously, Kentucky's not been doing that at all as of late. So let's start here. First off, I was pretty surprised Calipari still went through with his coach's show on Monday evening. What were your initial takeaways from hearing what he had to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of certain that, he would go through with it unless there was going to be something amiss in terms of a coaching change or significant talks of some of the major UK athletics donors raising the money for the buyout. And I think once we hit kind of Sunday night and especially Monday morning, and it became clear that that wasn't going to materialize, at least until the show on Monday night, I figured he would be going through with it. Important to note that they usually take calls on the show, and this was a social media submitted question only interaction episode for the fan base. I thought Cal summed it up pretty good with his first words of the show. He said, "I have had better weekends." And I think that could sum up a lot of the angst that's around the program, both from a fan base perspective and from, the coaches and players themselves. The thing that struck me the most was that John Calipari largely said the right things during his radio show on Monday night. He talked about, the need to get older via the transfer portal. He talked about, being sick to his stomach at the way the season ended with that first round loss to Oakland. He talked about, the promise of this team, how he's excited to get going again with next year's group, all of that stuff. But Kentucky fans have really checked out of John Calipari, both from him talking about the path to the NBA that Lexington offers to, we got a great group of kids coming in next year, to even when he, makes hints at the tweaks he can make, over the course of a season. For every, one Kentucky fan on social media who was sticking with Cal and acknowledging that he was, shouldering some of the blame for what happened in Pittsburgh, there were at least 10 or 15 who, were kind of continuing on with thinking of him as a charlatan or a guy who's selling you a bag of goods that he can't come good on. So I was just really surprised that even though Calipari gave about as good a radio show performance as you could for a man who's been in the crosshairs for the last 4 or 5 days, he was still not getting any traction with what's becoming a louder and louder majority of the Kentucky fan base.
Well, that's what's so interesting is, and you mentioned getting older, but like we've seen all these different iterations, right? We've seen Calipari with a veteran team. We've seen Calipari with, of course, the young freshmen, you know, and that's what he became so synonymous with, was all the one and dones. And you bring in, you know, John Wall and Boogie Cousins for a year. You bring in Anthony Davis. You bring in, you know, so on and so forth, all the different guys. And there were years where, yeah, there were 3 to 4 stud freshmen, all either starting or, you know, mostly starting and playing heavy minutes and all this. And obviously that, you know, model has just been a mixed bag in recent years. But I go back and look at last year's club, Cameron, and that was very senior laden, or at least, you know, upperclassman laden. When you talk about Oscar Tshiebwe, who was the reigning player of the year coming back to school, you had Antonio Reeves, you had Jacob Toppin. I mean, these were guys that had played years of college basketball, and even they, you know, were one and done and came up short. So I just don't know if, you know, getting older or bringing in the 4 or 5 stars again, like, I don't know if any of those approaches work right now for Cal.
Certainly, yeah. And you even look back to that team in 2022, they got upset by St. Peter's. That was by far a more experienced, more veteran group than John Calipari had for most of his Kentucky tenure to that point. And as you mentioned, last year's team, which struggled so mightily throughout the course of the season, throughout the course of SEC play, there was real concern that the 2022-23 Wildcats weren't going to make the NCAA tournament at one point, which is, you know, that COVID year aside, kind of an unfathomable thought. So, yeah, I think that's right where, you know, the fan base, where John Calipari has lost a fan base, right? It's that we have a long enough sample size to show that his traditional tried and true one and done method isn't working anymore, with college basketball skewing older and changing as the years have gone by. We've also seen Cal try and, you know, meet that to some extent, bring in older players, you know, have some transfer portal pickups. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't, but we've seen Cal try and do a couple different things. None of them have worked. Obviously, they haven't been to the second weekend of the tournament since 2019. The SEC tournament performances, they're 1-4 over the last 4 tournaments. So they've really stunk it up in Nashville as well. So not many people are buying into Cal, the innovator, the basketball mind. And we've also seen significant change on Kentucky's coaching staff as well, dating back to since they last made the Elite Eight in 2019. Assistant coaches coming and going, player personnel guys coming and going, people behind the scenes, even some folks who have been dealing with the NIL stuff coming and going. And the one constant with all the disappointments has kind of been John Calipari. And I think that's where the finger and the blame is squarely on now.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, because you know, what a lot of people were saying, at least what they heard with the coaches show the other night, is that, you know, he didn't really lay out a clear plan for improvement. Like, a lot of people are saying, hey, let's talk X's and O's, because it's been known for the longest. Cal's not one of the best X's and O's coaches. He's a good recruiter. He's a good motivator. He's a good this and that. But, like, you got to drop some plays or a good game plan to go win a game. You know, maybe sometimes he does get out coached by better coaches in this league. And I thought it was kind of revealing when he talked about the game the other night against Oakland and, you know, talked about defending the Golke kid who, you know, obviously went off and said, oh, well, you know, we saw games where he was 1 for 9 from 3. So we didn't want to focus just on him because Townsend was so good. I'm going, dude, if you don't know what happens in this tournament every year, that's the type of dude that gets hot and is going to start hitting threes. And he did. He was unconscious. It was unreal what he was doing, but it just resonated with me. Like, you didn't have a good game plan going into this one. And it's freaking Oakland. We're not talking about you played UConn or something.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of adding to the tinderbox that this whole situation between Calipari and the fan base has become. Is that, you know, especially if you want to isolate the case of Jack Golke, he does one thing, it's shoot 3-pointers. And even more specific than that, he loves to curl around some pin down screens, catch the ball going toward the pass on the left wing, and make 3-pointers. And that's exactly what he did time and time again against Kentucky on Thursday night, with seemingly no adjustment to the game plan. And Calipari, you know, he likes to talk, right? He likes to tell stories. He likes to kind of have some of these meandering press conferences. And he made a big deal going in, not only in the immediate run-up to the NCAA tournament, but even when the team was struggling a bit in January and February when they'd be losing games. He promoted this theory that Kentucky was built for March. He said it time and time again. And when you go out and you lose both of the 2 postseason games you play in March, when you talk about trying to keep your team loose and free and talking about taking them bowling in the press conference before the NCAA tournament game, and they come out and they look tight, and really only your 2 fifth-year guys were the only ones who got out of the starting gates and showed up and played well enough for your team to win. that stuff's going to wear thin on people. And, now we're going to be entering, or most likely entering year 16 of John Calipari at Kentucky. And I think a lot of the fan base has gotten tired of maybe a lack of that X's and O's discussion, a lack of the coherent game planning answers. And obviously when things are going wrong and you're losing games, that's not going to fly with a lot of people.
More with Cameron Drummond here in just a second, but I want to remind you guys, this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. Each week we are picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. And today we're highlighting the NC State Wolfpack. They're obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in their first two games in the tournament, picking up wins over Texas Tech, and Oakland has set them up to play Marquette in the Sweet 16. They say win life, go Rogue. And that is exactly what the Golden Grizzlies have done here so far, or rather the Wolfpack have done so far here over at NC State. So take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada, and go find your next big adventure. You can go shop all their great inventory and check out all their new rides over there at nissanusa.com. Again, want to check out all the great features on all the new rides they have, the new SUVs from our friends at Nissan. It is nissanusa.com. Continue our conversation with our buddy Cameron Drummond, and he of course covers Kentucky basketball for the Lexington Herald-Leader. And Cameron, the big thing now, we had the coaches show Monday night, and now all signs kind of point to something here on Tuesday. Mitch Barnhart and company are going to make some kind of decision on where we're going to go, and so that's where I kind of wanted to go next. Is we heard from Cal's side. He wants to be there and he wants to come back. But if Mitch Barnhart decides to come in Tuesday afternoon and says, look, we got the buyout money, we're going to make a change. Do you think that's where the majority of the fan base is leaning right now, what they'd like to see happen?
I think the majority of the fan base would like to see, John Calipari no longer be the Kentucky men's basketball coach. And while I don't think that will happen, I think that is setting up a season that is going to be even more of a referendum with every win, every loss on what the future of Kentucky is and where the basketball program is nationally and the stature of it than we've ever seen before. I mean, obviously everyone knows about, how massive the buyout is. It's a little bit more than $33 million right now. It would drop to, I believe, a little bit more than $27 million after next season. All things being equal, that's $6 or $7 million. If you're going to be spending a boatload of money to get rid of your basketball coach, that is, somewhat negligible, right? If you're going to pony up the money, you're going to pony up the money. But there is a lot going on in the UK athletics department right now, and especially when it relates to Mitch Barnhart and some of the recent coaching decisions, coaching extensions that he's made. It's not too long ago, months ago now, that Mark Stoops was the head football coach at Texas A&M for about an hour, and they had to go through the process of reconciling with him coming back to UK. We just had a whole saga with Liam Cohen leaving for the NFL, Kentucky's former offensive coordinator, for the second time in a 3-year span. Kentucky's had a lot of instability at that high-profile position. They just parted ways with Kyra Elzy, who was the women's basketball coach for 4 years, who really underachieved, not only in postseason play when she got there, but also in the SEC and league play as well. And Mitch Barnhart is the guy who gave Calipari what everyone calls this lifetime contract with this ridiculous buyout figure. And Calipari's salary is about to increase to $9 million as well, starting in a couple seasons each year. So there's a lot, that kind of Mitch Barnhart has made in his bed here. And I don't think it's a secret that he's, maybe on more of the conservative side when it comes to being athletic director, especially when it comes to some of the changes that have happened in college athletics in recent years, whether it's NIL or the transfer portal. So he's a very interesting figure to kind of be the centerpiece to all this. And you have to wonder if he wants, I mean, it's probably going to be a headache if you're going out and trying to find a men's basketball coach at this late juncture. And that's also to say nothing of what the coaching market is. I think our friends about 70 miles west here in Louisville are starting to learn some of the realities of what it's like when one or two guys who you're targeting in a college basketball coaching search go off the board. So I expect Calipari to be the coach at Kentucky next season. I think there's going to be some hard conversations when him and Mitch Barnhart do meet here over the next couple of days. And I think that that relationship will be definitely something to monitor, especially if some disappointing results, start the 24-25 season.
All right, just got two more for you. Humor me, though. If they did decide, got a bug up their butt and said, we're going to make a change, who are some names you think should be or would be candidates? Because I've heard everything from Jay Wright to, the Baylor coach to, even Bruce Pearl's name. Who do you think would be some realistic names that could be, candidates?
Well, I think everything starts and ends with Scott Drew. In much of the fashion that he was maybe the pie in the sky name that a lot of Louisville folks had circled when their men's basketball opening came to fruition. Scott Drew is the name for Kentucky basketball. He is the first call. He will be the biggest swing, whether that's a week from now, 2 years from now, whenever that comes to pass. Scott Drew is the name that Mitch Barnhart wants, that Mitch Barnhart would target for that Kentucky opening. And then, beyond that, you got to look at some of the guys who are probably, focused a little bit more on their NCAA tournament teams right now, but it's a list just as strong as you'd imagine it would be for a job of this caliber. We're talking Dan Hurley at UConn, Shaka Smart at Marquette, Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, TJ Otzelberger at Iowa State, especially if they can make an Elite Eight or have a sneaky Final Four run this year. But maybe not a lot of people are thinking about who I think would be a real contender for the job should it come open is Todd Golden at Florida. I know he's just recently got a bigger contract there, but you think about a young guy, almost the complete opposite of John Calipari in terms of being analytically focused, analytically driven. He had a whale of a press conference in Lexington earlier this year after the Gators come back and won that game in overtime. So I think he kind of represents the other end of the spectrum. Mark Pope is a UK alum, a former national champion at Kentucky. He's had some good seasons at BYU. So, Nate Oates at Alabama, obviously you can't ignore the success they've had, right in Kentucky's face in league play over the last few years. So those are a smattering of names as you'd expect. It's some of the creme de la creme of college basketball coaching right now. But I think Scott Drew is A1, number one, the guy who you're going to see everyone tweeting about the moment that Kentucky needs a new men's basketball coach.
Last one for you, Cameron. I know we kept you longer than I said, but the players,
no, it's all good.
The players and Cal talked about it, having discussions with guys about, who's going to come back and all this. And I look at mock drafts now and I see, Reed Sheppard is projected to go 4th overall and Rob Dillingham projected to go 6th overall. So I don't know what's the likelihood of those coming back. I know obviously Reed is a legacy and, maybe he might want to come back with a bunch of NIL deals and come back. But, everybody from Aaron Bradshaw to DJ Wagner on down. Who do you think is even likely to come back next year?
Yeah, you mentioned Sheppard. Obviously, there are tremendous circumstances at play there. What with the NIL money he could make from being a legacy player, from being the National Freshman of the Year, coming back at Kentucky to, potentially just not winning his final game at Kentucky to be a real dud of a performance in an NCAA tournament upset loss. The two names that a lot of people here are circling as the most intriguing stay-or-go decisions are DJ Wagner and Zvonimir Ivicic. From Wagner's perspective, his family is incredibly close with Calipari. Those ties run deep. They have total faith in him. He's obviously not quite had the freshman season that many expected, with him being such a nationally known recruit since even middle school. And getting him back for a second year not only would be important from a stability standpoint and a veteran standpoint. Kentucky has 6 freshmen coming in next season, including 2 guards. And DJ Wagner would be a great addition from a ball handling, veteran, point of attack defense perspective. But he can also, serve to boost his NBA draft profile as well. He's no certainty to even be drafted. He's looked at as a second-round choice right now. Battled a wrist injury, battled an ankle injury this year. So there's real buzz and momentum right now in Lexington towards DJ Wagner perhaps coming back for a second season. And with Ivicic, Kentucky had those trio of 7-foot bigs this year, and depth was something that was talked about all year long, especially in the front court. But for all that, Kentucky really didn't have depth in some of the moments that mattered later in the season. Cal was really scrambling whether to use Ugonna Onyenso as a defensive presence. Aaron Bradshaw is more of an offensive energy guy, and Z as, a real finesse offensive player who got a late start. The NCAA held up his eligibility, all those things. But if Kentucky were to bring in 3 really talented 7-footers have the season they had, have the NCAA tournament they had, and to not return any of those guys for next season will be looked at as a pretty big disappointment. They've got a couple bigs coming in. One of them, Sam Tosero, is looked at as more of a project, long-term, old-school center. Jaden Quaintance is a really young player. I believe he's only 17, maybe even 16. But he has tremendous NBA upside. He might be a 2-year college player. But still, that's an incredibly young guy to be thrusting, a lot of responsibility upon, whether he plays the 4 or the 5. So there would be a spot for Zvonimir Ivicic if he came back. He's obviously had a very interesting, path to Kentucky and even time in Lexington. But, I mean, there's no secret that Cal needs to get older. He said that many times on his radio show Monday night. He talked about adding 1 or 2 guys via the transfer portal. He made a couple hints about potentially DJ Wagner, Reed Sheppard coming back and him, being willing to embrace them with open arms if they choose to do so. But Cal talked about being more physical and getting older. And for that to come to pass, he's going to need maybe 1 or 2 surprise decisions to go his way in terms of guys from this year's team holding over to next season as well.
Yeah. Are there any more twins, guard duos out there like the Harrison twins they could just find and have them stick around for a couple years? I mean, that seemed to work out well. But Cameron, we can't thank you enough, man, for taking out some time. Follow us, man, on social media, of course, at CDrummond97, and you can read his stuff there at Kentucky.com, of course, doing all the great work up there at the Herald Leader. Cameron, again, thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
No, if I'm going to spend an hour watching a Facebook Live with no images on a Monday night, I might as well milk it for all the content I can. So I appreciate it. Thank y'all for having me. All
right. Thanks so much, man. That's Cameron Drummond there of the Lexington Herald Leader, and again on Twitter at CDrummond97. We appreciate him taking some time out. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Keep coming back. Check us out tomorrow on the show. We'll get back to more football conversation, but hey, for your second listen, go check out Locked On. They've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So for your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. I'm Chris Gordon. This has been Locked On SEC.